The smell of antiseptic is a ghost. It haunts the halls of Metropolitan General Hospital, a constant, sterile presence that fails to cover the deeper sense of illness, fear, and bleach. Here, time is measured in heartbeats and the rhythmic sigh of ventilators. For Nurse Alara Vance, time was measured in the slow, deliberate movements she used to make herself invisible. She moved through the chaos of the emergency department like a ship in a fog, silent and unnoticed. Her shoulders were perpetually slumped, her gaze fixed on the polished linoleum floors. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that did nothing to soften the tired lines around her eyes. She was a ghost here, too, a whisper among the other nurses. "Have you seen Vance?" someone might ask. The answer was usually a shrug. She was the one assigned to stock the supply closets, to clean the spills no one else wanted to touch, to change the linens in empty trauma bays. She was slow. She was quiet. She was, in the brutally honest hierarchy of the ER, at the very bottom. A mouse. That's what they called her when they thought she couldn't hear. The mouse. Alara didn't mind, or rather, she had taught herself not to mind. A quiet life was a safe life. Anonymity was a shield. She had seen enough noise, enough chaos to last a lifetime. All she wanted was the gentle hum of obscurity. She focused on her task, restocking a crash cart with painstaking precision. Her hands, which often seemed clumsy and hesitant when others were watching, moved with a secret, fluid economy when she was alone. Each vial, each packet, each sterile instrument was placed just so, a place for everything and everything in its place. It was a small island of order in an ocean of pandemonium. She subconsciously tugged at the long sleeve of her scrubs, ensuring it fully covered her left forearm. It was a nervous tic, a habit born from a need to conceal the jagged, silvery scar that snaked its way from her wrist to her elbow. It was a relic from another life, a life she had buried so deep she could almost pretend it never happened. Almost. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she could still feel the phantom heat of the desert sun and the percussive thud of rotors. But here, in the cool, climate-controlled hospital, she was just Alara, just the mouse. "Vance, where's that damn suture kit? I asked for it 5 minutes ago." The voice cut through the air like a scalpel, sharp and cold. Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery. He stood in the doorway of Trauma Bay 2 like a titan, his perfectly tailored scrubs unable to hide the powerful physique beneath. He was handsome in a severe, intimidating way, with sharp blue eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was a brilliant surgeon, a fact he never let anyone forget. He was also a narcissist, a bully, and the undisputed king of this chaotic kingdom. Alara flinched. She had the kit on her cart. She had been on her way when she'd been diverted to clean a puddle of saline. "Coming, doctor," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. She pushed the heavy cart, its wheels sticking and squeaking in protest. She moved as fast as she could, but her movements felt sluggish, mired in the thick air of his impatience. He watched her approach, his arms crossed, a sneer twisting his lips. He made no move to help, simply tapping his foot with an exaggerated rhythm. "Is it possible for you to move any slower?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Patients have been known to die of old age waiting for you to cross a room." A few junior residents and nurses nearby snickered. Dr. Peterson, Finch's most loyal sycophant, laughed loudest of all. Alara's face burned with shame. She kept her eyes down, focused on the cart. She just had to get it to him. Just a few more feet. As she reached him, her hand trembled slightly. The cart's dodgy wheel caught on a seam in the floor. It lurched sideways. With a sickening crash, the top tray tilted, sending sterile instruments, gauze packets, and suture kits scattering across the floor. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the ER bay. Finch stared at the mess on the floor, then slowly lifted his gaze to Alara. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You are, without a doubt, the most incompetent, useless excuse for a nurse I have ever had the misfortune of working with," he said, his voice low and menacing. Each word was a physical blow. He took a step forward, looming over her. Alara shrank back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Look at this. A sterile field. Contaminated. Wasted supplies. Wasted time. All because you can't even push a cart properly. He gestured dismissively at the mess. Clean it up, he spat, and then get out of my sight. Go count cotton balls or something. Do anything that doesn't involve patient care. He turned his back on her, snapping his fingers at another nurse. Chloe, get me a new kit, now. One that hasn't been fumbled by a ghost. Chloe, a young, kind-hearted nurse who had always shown Alara a sliver of warmth, shot her a sympathetic look before scurrying away to do his bidding. Margaret, a senior nurse who had been at Metropolitan for 20 years, simply turned and walked away, her face a carefully blank slate. She knew it was wrong, but Finch's wrath was a force of nature better avoided. Alara knelt on the cold floor, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Her hand shook as she began to pick up the scattered supplies. The plastic crinkled under her touch, a sound that echoed the shattering of her composure. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a soldier. She was just a woman on her knees, cleaning up a mess, surrounded by the quiet judgment of her peers. This was her life now. This was the peace she had chosen, a peace that felt an awful lot like punishment. An hour later, the hospital's rhythm was shattered by a new sound, the wail of multiple sirens, converging on their location. A multi-car pileup on the interstate during rush hour. The radio crackled with the grim report. Rollovers, ejections, a fuel tanker involved. The ER braced for impact. The incident with Finch was forgotten, swept away by the coming tide of trauma. The automatic doors hissed open again and again, admitting a procession of the wounded. Paramedics shouted vitals over the din. The organized chaos of the ER kicked into high gear. Finch was in his element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of life-saving. He directed traffic, made split-second decisions, and moved with an arrogant grace that, even Alara had to admit, was effective. Amidst the flood of patients, one was different. He came in on a backboard, his body a canvas of gruesome injuries. He had no ID, no wallet, nothing to say who he was. A John Doe. He'd been found 30 yards from the main wreckage, thrown from a vehicle that was now a twisted, unrecognizable shell. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow, his blood pressure dangerously low. Finch gave the man a cursory glance. Multiple fractures, probable internal bleeding, head trauma. Classic MVC victim, he declared, already turning his attention to a patient with more interesting injuries. He looks like a transient. Check his pockets for a bottle, not a wallet. Dr. Peterson chuckled appreciatively. Right, Chief. Stabilize him for transfer, Finch ordered, waving a dismissive hand. We need this bay for the councilman's wife who is in the same pileup. She's got a broken arm. County Hospital can deal with this one. The command was clear. This man was not a priority. He was debris to be cleared. Alara had been tasked with logging the incoming patients, a job that kept her out of the way. But from her station, she could see the John Doe. Something about him tugged at a thread of memory she kept locked away. It wasn't his face, which was swollen and bruised beyond recognition. It was his build. The lean, corded muscle in his arms. The specific carriage of his shoulders, even in unconsciousness. It was the body of a professional. A fighter. Her official job was to write his name on the board as John Doe. But a strange compulsion drew her closer. The nurse assigned to him was frantically trying to get an IV line started, her hands fumbling. His veins are collapsing, she said in frustration. Finch overheard. Then he's circling the drain. Don't waste more than 5 minutes on him. Prep the transfer. He walked away, his focus already on his high-profile patient. The nurse, seeing Alara standing there, gave a sigh of relief. Vance. Perfect. You take over. I've got to help with the councilman's wife. She didn't wait for a reply. Alara was alone with the John Doe. The monitors above him beeped a frantic, unstable rhythm. She looked at his chart. The paramedics had noted his condition on arrival, but they had missed something. Alara's eyes, trained to see patterns others overlooked, scanned his body. She saw the obvious lacerations, the grotesque angle of his leg. But she saw more. Her gaze locked onto a tiny puncture wound on the side of his neck, almost perfectly hidden in the shadow of his jaw. It was no bigger than a pinprick, surrounded by a faint, spidery web of discoloration that was slowly, almost imperceptibly, spreading. It wasn't a rash from the accident. It was something else. Her blood ran cold. Then she saw his hand. His fingers were twitching. Not a random spasm, but a specific, rhythmic tremor. It was a subtle neurological sign, one that 99% of medical professionals would attribute to his head trauma. But Alara was the 1%. Her mind, sluggish and fogged by years of deliberate suppression, suddenly cleared. The antiseptic smell of the ER faded, replaced by the memory of hot, dusty air and the acrid scent of explosives. The beeping monitors became the sound of a different machine, a machine on a C-130 flying over hostile territory. She had seen this before. The pinprick wound, the spreading rash, the specific neurological tremor. It wasn't just trauma, it was a toxin. A sophisticated, fast-acting neurotoxin designed to mimic the symptoms of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. It was an assassination tool. Her breath hitched. She knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that transfer to a county hospital would be a death sentence. He didn't have hours. He had minutes. She spun around, her movements suddenly sharp and efficient. The hesitant, mousy nurse was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone with an entirely different posture. She strode out of the trauma bay, her eyes scanning the chaotic ER until she found him. "Dr. Finch," she said. Her voice was clear and steady, devoid of the tremor he was used to. It was so different that it made him pause. He turned, an annoyed expression on his face. "What is it, Vance? Did you get lost on your way to the supply closet?" "The John Doe in Bay 3, she said, ignoring the jibe. "It's not just the trauma. He's been poisoned, a neurotoxin. We need to administer a specific cocktail of atropine and pralidoxime immediately." Finch stared at her, as if she had sprouted a second head. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, cruel sound that drew the attention of everyone nearby. "Poisoned? A neurotoxin? Have you been reading spy novels on your break, nurse? The man was in a car crash. He has a brain bleed. That's what's causing the neurological signs." "No," Alara insisted, her voice hardening. "The presentation is wrong for a bleed. The spreading petechia from the puncture site, the specific fasciculations in his extremities. It's classic organophosphate poisoning, but an advanced, weaponized variant. The standard treatment won't work. It needs to be a high-dose, multi-agent protocol." The technical jargon, delivered with such unnerving confidence, gave Finch a moment's pause. But his ego quickly reasserted itself. Who was this mousy nurse to question his diagnosis? "I am the chief of surgery at this hospital," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I have forgotten more about medicine than you will ever know. The man is a transient with a head injury. Now you have your orders. Prep him for transport." "He'll be dead before the ambulance reaches the end of the block," Alara stated, her gaze unwavering. It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. Finch's face darkened with rage. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by her. "Let me make this very clear for your tiny little brain," he hissed, stepping so close she could feel the heat of his anger. "You will go back to that bay, you will put a bandage on that man, and you will wheel him out to the transport team when they arrive. If you defy me on this, you are fired. Do you understand me? You will be out of a job before that man is out of the building." Alara looked into his cold blue eyes. She saw the absolute certainty there, the unshakable conviction of his own superiority. And she saw the death warrant he had just signed for the man in Bay 3. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I understand," she said softly. Finch smirked, victorious. "Good. Now get out of my face." Alara turned and walked back toward Trauma Bay 3. Her steps were measured, calm. But inside, a war was raging. Her training, her oath, her very instincts were screaming at her. Let him die, and you can go back to your quiet life. No one will know. It will be Finch's mistake, not yours. But then she saw the man on the gurney, his life slipping away because of one man's arrogance. She thought of the men she had lost before, the faces that haunted her dreams. She couldn't add another one to the list. Not again. She reached the bay. The transport team was 5 minutes out. The clock was ticking. She looked at the patient, then at the door. She made her choice. With a decisive click, she thumbed the lock on the door. Then she turned to the crash cart she had so carefully stocked earlier. Her movements were a blur of efficiency. No hesitation, no fumbling. She drew up 2 separate syringes, one with a massive dose of atropine, the other with a drug so rarely used it was kept under lock and key, a drug she knew how to access. Pralidoxime. the specific antidote. She ignored the banging that started on the door. "Vance, what are you doing? Open this door!" It was Peterson's voice. She moved to the patient's side, swabbing his arm with an alcohol wipe. "This is going to burn," she whispered, more to herself than to him. She expertly found the collapsing vein, her touch firm and sure. She pushed the atropine first, fast and hard. Then she switched syringes and administered the second drug. The banging on the door grew louder, more frantic. Now it was Finch's voice, roaring with fury. "Vance, open this door right now, or I swear I will have you arrested." A loud crack echoed as a security guard's shoulder hit the door. It splintered, but held. Alara paid them no mind. Her entire world had shrunk to the patient and the monitors above his head. His heart rate, which had been plummeting, began to stabilize. The frantic beeping slowed to a more regular, steady rhythm. The twitching in his fingers subsided. A faint flush of color returned to his ashen skin. It was working. A wave of relief so profound it made her dizzy washed over her. She had been right. She had saved him. With a final shattering crash, the door burst open. Finch stood there, flanked by two burly security guards, his face purple with rage. He saw the empty syringes in her hand, the stabilized vitals on the monitor. He understood instantly what she had done. The rage in his eyes curdled into something colder, something venomous. "You're fired," he breathed, the words heavy with malice. "You are finished. Security, get this unhinged woman out of my hospital. Escort her off the premises. Now. I want her gone." The guards hesitated for a second, looking from the furious doctor to the strangely calm nurse. "Now!" Finch bellowed. They grabbed Alara's arms. She didn't resist. She had done what she had to do. As they pulled her from the room, her eyes met Finch's. He expected to see fear or tears. Instead, he saw a flicker of something he didn't recognize. It looked like pity. They marched her through the crowded ER, a spectacle for her former colleagues. Some looked away in shame. Others watched with morbid curiosity. Chloe looked like she was about to cry. Alara kept her head held high. They didn't put her in an elevator. They took her down the service stairs, a final indignity. The security guards pushed her through the glass doors of the main entrance. She stumbled out onto the rain-slicked pavement. A cold, miserable drizzle had started, plastering her thin scrubs to her skin. The doors hissed shut behind her, sealing her out. She stood there for a moment, shivering in the rain. Fired. Disgraced. Her quiet life was in ruins. All for a man whose name she didn't even know. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. So much for hiding. She started walking, with no destination in mind. The sounds of the city were muffled by the rain and the roaring in her ears. She was so focused on the pavement in front of her that she didn't hear it at first. A new sound, cutting through the rhythm of the rain. A deep, percussive thump, thump, thump that grew rapidly louder. It was a sound that vibrated deep in her bones, a sound from her past. The sound of helicopter rotors. She looked up. Not one, but two sleek black helicopters were descending from the low-hanging clouds. They weren't police or news choppers. They were military-grade, unmarked, and menacing. They ignored the helipad on the hospital roof. Instead, with breathtaking skill, they landed directly on the multi-lane highway in front of the hospital, their rotor wash sending cars swerving and creating a hurricane of wind and rain. Traffic screeched to a halt. People stared, dumbfounded. Before the skids had even fully settled, side doors slid open and soldiers began to rappel down. They were clad in black tactical gear, armed with short-barreled rifles, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. They moved with a terrifying, fluid purpose, forming a perimeter and shutting down the entire street. A single figure, clearly in command, strode from the lead helicopter towards the hospital entrance. He was a major, his rank visible on his collar. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the area with practiced intensity. He and his team stormed into the ER, their muddy boots and advanced weaponry a stark contrast to the sterile environment. The chaos in the ER froze. Doctors and nurses stopped dead, staring at the sudden military invasion. The lead security guard, the same one who had thrown Alara out, stepped forward. "Hey, you can't be in here. This is a..." The major didn't even break stride. He brushed past the guard as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked to the main nursing station, his gaze sweeping over the terrified faces. "I'm looking for someone," he announced, his voice a low growl that commanded absolute attention. "We have a situation. We were told there was an angel here." A bewildered silence answered him. "Angel?" They looked at each other, confused. "She's a nurse," the major clarified, his patience clearly wearing thin. "She saved one of our people." Chloe, her eyes wide with a dawning realization, stepped forward timidly. You mean Alara? Alara Vance?" "Where is she?" the major demanded. She was fired," Chloe stammered. "Dr. Finch just had security throw her out." The major's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. He turned to the security guard, who had gone pale. "You threw her out?" I was just following orders from Dr. Finch," the guard squeaked. The major didn't have time for him. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Eagle 1, this is ground lead. Target is not in the building. She's been ejected. Commence search of the immediate exterior. Codename, Angel." Outside, Alara was still standing on the sidewalk, watching the unbelievable scene unfold. One of the soldiers spotted her. He raised a hand and pointed. The major burst back out of the hospital doors. He saw her, standing there, soaked and shivering. His entire demeanor changed. The hard, intimidating soldier vanished, replaced by a man filled with urgency and respect. He jogged over to her, his team fanning out to form a protective circle around them. "Captain Vance?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Alara's head snapped up. No one had called her that in 5 years. Captain. "General Vance sent us," the major continued, his eyes full of concern. "We have a priority 1 situation. Are you all right, ma'am?" The 2 security guards, who had been watching from the doorway, froze. Their jaws dropped. Captain? Ma'am? This was the mousy, incompetent nurse they had just manhandled out into the rain. Alara just stared at him, the rain dripping from her hair onto her face. The past was no longer buried. It had just landed on the highway. "The asset," she finally managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Is he?" "He's alive, thanks to you," the major said. "But he's not stable. We need you." He gestured back towards the hospital. "Let's go." Without another word, Alara turned and walked back toward the doors she had been thrown out of moments before. This time, she wasn't being dragged. She was being flanked by an honor guard of elite soldiers. They parted for her as she approached, their deference absolute. She strode back into the emergency department. The sea of people parted before her. The whispers that followed her now were not of ridicule, but of shock and awe. Dr. Finch was in Trauma Bay 3, barking orders. The patient's vitals were crashing again. The antidote Alara had administered was wearing off, and Finch, still treating for a head injury, was making everything worse. "Increase the mannitol drip! I need a neuroconsult! Stat!" he yelled, not noticing the change in the room's atmosphere. The major and 2 of his soldiers entered the bay first, their weapons held in a low, ready position. Finch spun around, his face livid. "What is the meaning of this? I am trying to save a man's life. Get out of my ER." "This facility is now under the operational control of the United States military," the major stated flatly. "This patient is a priority asset, and your authority here is revoked." Finch laughed, a hysterical, disbelieving sound. "My authority? I am the chief of surgery. You have no jurisdiction." His words died in his throat as Alara stepped into the room. She walked past him without a glance and went straight to the patient's side. Her eyes scanned the monitors. "His pressure is dropping, and he's going into respiratory distress. The 2nd dose is overdue." Finch stared at her, then at the soldiers. "What is going on? Vance, what have you done?" The major held up a small, ruggedized tablet. On the screen was the stern face of a man in a general's uniform, his office adorned with flags. "Dr. Finch," the man on the screen said, his voice like rolling thunder. "I am General Marcus Vance. The man you are failing to treat is Captain Alex Thorne of the United States Army Special Operations Command. And the woman you just fired is Captain Alara Vance, one of the most decorated combat flight nurses in the history of the Air Force Pararescue. She is also my daughter." The color drained from Finch's face. He looked from the general on the screen to Alara, who was now calmly drawing up another dose of the antidote. Daughter. Captain. The words echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. "From this moment on," the general continued, his voice cold as ice. Captain Vance is in complete and total command of Captain Thorne's medical care. You and your staff will provide her with anything she requires, without question and without delay. If you interfere in any way, you will be charged with obstruction of a federal operation and high treason. Do I make myself clear?" Finch could only nod, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The entire foundation of his world had just crumbled beneath him. Alara didn't spare him a thought. She administered the second dose to Captain Thorne. "He's stabilizing," she announced to the Major, "but we don't know the full extent of the toxin's progression. I need a secure room, a full-spectrum blood analyzer, and access to the hospital's entire pharmaceutical stock. Now." "You heard her," the Major barked at the stunned hospital staff. "Move!" They scrambled to obey. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. The mousy nurse was gone. In her place was a commander, her authority absolute and her purpose clear. The ghost had become a general. Within minutes, they had moved Captain Thorne to a private suite on the top floor, secured by soldiers at every entrance. Alara worked with a focused intensity that mesmerized the military personnel and the few hospital staff cleared to assist her. She hooked Thorne up to a dozen different monitors, drew blood for analysis, and began a complex regimen of supportive therapies. Her hands were steady, her commands precise. General Vance remained on the tablet, which was now propped on a nearby table. "What's his status, Captain?" he asked, the formal address a sign of the professional respect between them, father or not. "The antidote is holding, but the toxin is aggressive," Alara reported, never taking her eyes off the monitors. "It's a variant of XB7, but modified, more potent. Whoever designed this knew what they were doing. It's designed to be untraceable post-mortem." "Our intelligence confirms that," the general said, his face grim. "Captain Thorne was ambushed during a transport. He was the sole survivor. The attackers took the primary sample he was carrying. He's the only one who can identify them." The true stakes slammed into Alara. This wasn't just about saving one man's life. It was about national security. Captain Thorne was a living witness to a catastrophic breach. "The people who did this will not stop," Alara said, thinking aloud. "They'll want to finish the job. This hospital isn't secure." "My team is working on that," the general assured her. "We're digging into the attack, cross-referencing everything. We're also doing a background check on all key personnel at that hospital, starting with Dr. Finch." An hour passed. Alara managed to bring Thorne's condition from critical to serious but stable. He was still unconscious, but he was holding his own. The Major entered the room, his face tight. "General, we have something," he said, handing a datapad to Alara. On the screen was a summary of Dr. Alistair Finch's life. Prestigious medical school, stellar residency, a rapid rise to chief of surgery. But beneath the polished surface was a darker story. Online gambling sites, offshore accounts, a series of escalating debts to very dangerous people. And then, the final piece of the puzzle, a single, large deposit made to one of his accounts 12 hours before the attack on Captain Thorne. The deposit originated from a shell corporation linked to a private military contractor known for its black market dealings. "It wasn't just ego," Alara whispered, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "His misdiagnosis. He was trying to kill him." "He was paid to ensure Captain Thorne died on his operating table," the general confirmed, his voice vibrating with fury. "The car crash was supposed to provide the perfect cover. Your intervention was the one thing they didn't plan for." Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside the room, shouting, followed by a dull thud. The Major drew his sidearm instantly, moving to the door. "Status!" he yelled into his radio. "Contact! Man down! We have an intruder, dressed as an orderly!" Before anyone could react, the door to the suite burst inward. A man in hospital scrubs stood there, but he moved with the lethal grace of a professional. In his hand was a syringe filled with a clear liquid. His target was obvious: Captain Thorne. The soldier posted inside the room raised his rifle, but the assassin was faster. He lunged, a blade appearing in his other hand, and disarmed the soldier with a brutal efficiency. He was closing in on Thorne's bed. Alara reacted on pure instinct. The years of hiding fell away like a shed skin. She grabbed a heavy stainless steel medical tray from a nearby table and swung it like a discus. It caught the assassin square in the side of the head with a sickening clang. He stumbled, momentarily dazed. It was the only opening she needed. She didn't scream or run. She moved forward, her body low. She flowed around the bed, a blur of motion. The assassin recovered, turning to face her, the syringe held like a dagger. He lunged. Alara sidestepped, her hand shooting out to grip his wrist. She used his momentum against him, twisting his arm in a way that defied anatomy. Bones snapped. The assassin cried out, dropping the syringe. She didn't stop. She drove the heel of her other hand up under his chin, snapping his head back. A second blow, a precise nerve strike to the side of his neck with the edge of her hand, sent him crumpling to the floor, unconscious. The entire confrontation took less than 5 seconds. Silence descended on the room. The major and the other soldier, who had just regained his footing, stared at her. They had seen combat. They had seen violence. But they had never seen a nurse move like that. The fluid, brutal precision was that of a seasoned operator. Alara stood over the downed assassin, her chest heaving, adrenaline singing in her veins. She looked down at her hands, half expecting to see them covered in desert dust. "The hospital is compromised," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Finch has allies inside. We can't stay here. We need to move Captain Thorne. Now." The major nodded, his expression one of pure respect. Where to? Alara's mind raced. They needed a place that was off-grid, defensible, with access to power for the medical equipment. There was only one option, a place she hadn't been to in years. Her sanctuary, her fortress. "I have a place," she said. "In the mountains, about 2 hours from here." "How do we get him there?" the major asked. "They'll be watching the roads." A plan formed in Alara's mind, born from years of exfiltration planning. "We create a diversion. A full motorcade, lights and sirens, heading north. They'll follow it, but we won't be in it." She pointed to the window. "We go through the service tunnels to the sub-level garage. There's a private ambulance service that contracts with the hospital. We take one of their vehicles. No markings. We go south, then loop around." The general's voice came from the tablet. "It's risky, Captain." "Staying here is suicide, General," Alara countered. "This is our only move." There was a pause. "Make it happen, Major," the general commanded. "Captain Vance is in tactical command." The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. While the major organized the decoy motorcade, Alara and a medic prepared Thorne for transport, hooking him up to portable, battery-powered monitors. They moved him onto a gurney and, shrouded by a phalanx of soldiers, descended into the belly of the hospital. The service tunnels were a labyrinth of concrete and pipes, a world away from the clean corridors above. They moved quickly and silently. They reached the sub-level garage, a cavernous, dimly lit space. The ambulance was waiting, its engine humming. They loaded Thorne into the back, the space cramped with equipment and personnel. Alara and the major got in with him. "Decoy is rolling," a voice crackled over the radio. "They're on the move." "Go," Alara ordered the driver. The ambulance pulled out of the garage, merging seamlessly into the late-night city traffic. Alara watched the city lights flash by, her reflection a ghostly image in the window. The quiet nurse was well and truly gone, and Captain Alara Vance was back on mission. The cabin was exactly as she had left it 2 years ago, tucked away in a dense pine forest, accessible only by a long, winding dirt road. It was her bolt hole from the world. It was small and rustic, built of dark wood, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. To any passerby, it was a simple vacation home. To Alara, it was a hard deck, defensible, isolated, and stocked for a siege. They had made the 2-hour drive without incident, the decoy having successfully drawn off any surveillance. The soldiers quickly established a perimeter, their dark forms melting into the trees. Inside, the cabin was transformed. The main room, with its stone fireplace and simple furniture, became a makeshift ICU. The major and his team ran cables, set up a satellite link for the general, and turned the rustic retreat into a tactical operations center. Alara worked tirelessly on Captain Thorne. She had managed to keep him stable, but the toxin was still in his system, a poison that fought her at every turn. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring unintelligible words. His fever was dangerously high. "We've identified the contractor who paid Finch," the general's voice announced from the satellite-linked monitor. "A firm called Ares Tactical Solutions. They do deniable ops for the highest bidder. We think they developed the toxin, and were selling it. Thorne's team intercepted their deal. Ares wants him silenced, and they want their product back. The sample he was carrying is still missing, likely destroyed in the crash. So they need him dead before he can talk, Alara concluded, adjusting an IV drip. And they know their diversion was just that, the Major added, looking at the thermal imaging from the perimeter sensors. They'll be coming. It's just a matter of when. The when came just before dawn. A flicker on the thermal sensor at the edge of the property. A single heat signature. Then 2. Then 10. They were moving in a coordinated pattern, closing in from all sides. Contact imminent, a soldier whispered over the comms. Multiple hostiles, east and west. The quiet of the forest was shattered by the sharp, distinct crack of a suppressed rifle. A bullet pinged off the stone chimney. The siege had begun. Alara didn't flinch. She placed a cooler filled with bags of chilled saline around Thorne's head and torso, a field-expedient way to fight his raging fever. Keep him alive, she muttered to herself. That was her mission. Outside, the firefight erupted in earnest. The night was alive with muzzle flashes and the percussive roar of automatic weapons. The Major was coordinating the defense, his voice calm and authoritative over the radio, directing his small team against a superior force. They're trying to flank us from the south, laying down suppressing fire. A round shattered the window above Alara's head, showering the floor with glass. She shielded Thorne's face with her body, then went back to checking his vitals. Heart rate was spiking. The stress of the firefight was affecting him. Major, she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. We need to end this, fast. They're trying to overwhelm us with numbers. They'll keep coming until we're out of ammo, or they're all dead. Working on it, Captain, he yelled back from his position near the door. Reinforcements are en route, but they're 30 minutes out. A grenade exploded near the porch, shaking the entire cabin. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, save for the strobing muzzle flashes outside and the green glow of the battery-powered medical monitors. They've cut the generator, a soldier yelled. In the dim light, Alara saw Thorne's eyes flutter open. He was conscious. He looked at her, his gaze confused but lucid. Where? He rasped. Stay calm, Captain, Alara said, her voice soothing but firm. You're in a safe place. Safe? He croaked, gesturing weakly toward the sounds of battle. Another volley of gunfire stitched across the front of the cabin, splintering the wooden walls. The Major cried out and fell back, clutching his shoulder. I'm hit! Alara was at his side in a second, ripping open his tactical vest. The wound was clean through, but he was losing blood. As she applied a pressure dressing, she saw that only one other soldier was still firing from the windows. They were about to be overrun. This was it, the final stand. She finished patching up the Major, then looked around the darkened room. Her eyes fell on the rifle dropped by the soldier who had been taken out in the hospital. It was leaning against the wall. Without a word, she picked it up. The weight was familiar, the balance perfect. It felt like an extension of her own arm. The timid nurse who fumbled with supply carts was a distant memory, a fiction she had created. This was real. Cover the back, she ordered the remaining soldier. I'll take the front. She moved to the shattered front window, the rifle tight against her shoulder. Through the splintered frame, she saw them. 3 figures, moving low and fast, preparing for the final assault on the porch. She took a breath, let it out slowly. Her target picture was clear. 1 shot, 1 down. It was the mantra of her old life. Crack! The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The lead mercenary dropped. Crack! The second one spun and fell. The third, the leader, dove for cover behind a large pine tree. He was pinned down. Nice shooting, Captain, the Major grunted from the floor. Alara didn't reply. She was in the zone. She could hear the man's breathing, see the slight shift of his gear as he prepared to move. He was going to make a break for the side of the cabin, out of her line of sight. She anticipated his move. She didn't aim at him. She aimed at the propane tank for the outdoor grill sitting on the edge of the porch. The mercenary broke from cover. At the same moment, Alara fired. The bullet struck the tank. The resulting explosion was a concussive roar of fire and shrapnel that lit up the pre-dawn sky. The mercenary leader was thrown back, his assault ending in a fiery blast. The remaining attackers, their leader gone, broke and fled into the woods. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by the crackling of the fire on the porch and the steady beep of Captain Thorne's heart monitor. Just as the sun began to crest the mountains, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. This time, they were friendly. Reinforcements had arrived. The siege was over. The aftermath was a blur. Medics took over care for the major and the other wounded soldiers. A forensics team began processing the scene. And Alara, having not slept in nearly 24 hours, finally allowed herself to sit down, the heavy rifle resting across her lap. Captain Thorne, now fully conscious and lucid, watched her from the bed. "They called you Angel," he said, his voice weak but clear. "I think they understated it." Alara looked at him, a weary smile touching her lips. "Just doing my job, Captain." Hours later, the hospital lobby was a media circus. News vans were parked outside, and reporters swarmed the entrance. Dr. Alistair Finch stood at a hastily assembled podium, his face a mask of grave concern. He was spinning his narrative, controlling the story. A deeply regrettable security breach, orchestrated by a disturbed and unstable former nurse, Finch said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. This individual, Alara Vance, was recently terminated for gross incompetence and erratic behavior. It appears she conspired with outside elements to kidnap a patient, endangering the entire hospital. I am here to assure you that we are cooperating fully with authorities to bring her to justice. He was brilliant. He was painting her as a disgruntled, violent employee, and himself as the stalwart leader protecting his hospital. He was winning. Right on cue, as he prepared to take questions, the main entrance doors of the hospital swung open. The crowd of reporters turned as one. Alara Vance walked in. She was no longer in scrubs or tactical gear. She wore a crisp, clean Air Force dress uniform, the silver captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders. Her hair was down, falling neatly around her face. She looked poised, professional, and powerful. On her right was General Marcus Vance, his uniform heavy with medals, his face a thundercloud of righteous anger. On her left was Captain Alex Thorne, pale and leaning on a cane, but very much alive, his own uniform immaculate. They were flanked by a silent contingent of military police. They walked through the stunned crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea. They stopped directly in front of the podium. Finch stared at them, his smug expression melting into pure, unadulterated panic. "Dr. Finch," General Vance began, his voice amplified by the forest of microphones now pointed at him. "You have been telling a compelling story, but you've left out a few key details." The general nodded to an aide, who connected a device to the hospital's PA system. A recording filled the lobby. It was Finch's voice, frantic and panicked, from a call made just after Alara had been fired. "She knows," Finch's recorded voice said. "The nurse, she used the antidote. She knows it's a toxin. The asset is stabilized. You have to handle it. Send your man in. I'll get him access. Just finish the job and get me my money." A collective gasp went through the lobby. The recording was irrefutable. It was a confession. Finch's face went white. That's a fabrication. It's fake. I've been framed," he shrieked, his composure shattering completely. He pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "It was her. She's a liar, a crazy, violent—" His tirade was cut short as two of the military police officers stepped forward. One of them read from a sheet of paper. "Alistair Finch, you are under arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, aiding and abetting a terrorist act, and treason against the United States of America." They snapped handcuffs on his wrists. The sound echoed in the silent lobby. "No! You can't do this to me!" he screamed, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down his face. "I am the chief of surgery. I am a pillar of this community. You can't!" He continued to scream and struggle as they dragged him away, a pathetic, broken man, his kingdom and his reputation destroyed in an instant. General Vance stepped up to the podium. His gaze fell on Alara, and for a moment, the stern general was replaced by a proud father. Then he addressed the crowd. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice booming. "Captain Alara Vance is a national hero. Her actions in this hospital and in the subsequent engagement saved the life of a decorated special operator and prevented a weapon of immense destructive power from falling into the wrong hands. Due to her courage and her refusal to bow to arrogant incompetence, a grave threat to this nation has been neutralized." He looked out at the sea of faces, at the hospital staff who had once scorned her. He saw Chloe, openly weeping with joy. He saw Margaret, her face filled with regret, but also admiration. Then, Chloe started to clap. It was a small sound at first. Then Margaret joined in. Then a resident. Within seconds, the entire lobby erupted in thunderous applause. It was a wave of vindication, washing over Ilara, cleansing the shame and humiliation she had endured. She stood tall, accepting their adulation not with arrogance, but with quiet grace. Her name was cleared. Her honor was restored. Later, in a quiet office overlooking the city, the applause had faded. It was just Ilara, her father, and Captain Thorne. The hospital board had already issued a public apology and reinstated her with back pay, an offer she had no intention of accepting. "I don't think counting cotton balls is in your future, Captain," General Vance said, a rare smile on his face. "I've been authorized to form a new unit, a small, elite, rapid response team, a fusion of top-tier medical expertise and special operations capability. A unit designed to go into the worst places on Earth and bring our people home. It needs a commander, someone with a unique skill set, someone who knows both sides of that coin." He looked at her expectantly. "The job is yours, if you want it. No more hiding, Ilara. We need you. The real you." Ilara looked out the window at the city below. She had tried so hard to build a small, quiet life, but the world had refused to let her be small. It had called on her to be what she truly was. She thought of the adrenaline of the fight, the satisfaction of a life saved, the purpose. She had missed it more than she ever admitted to herself. "I accept, General," she said, turning back to him. A genuine smile, the first in years, lit up her face. Her old life was over. She walked out of Metropolitan General Hospital for the final time, not as a disgraced outcast, but as a commander. Captain Thorne walked beside her, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. "Looks like I owe you my life about 5 times over," he said, his own smile reaching his eyes. "My guardian angel." "Just doing my job, Captain," she replied, the words feeling different now. They were no longer a shield, but a statement of fact. A black, official-looking car was waiting for them at the curb. As she got in, she took one last look at the hospital, a place of humiliation and, ultimately, of triumph. She was leaving it behind, along with the ghost she had pretended to be. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic, driving her toward a new mission, a new life, and the future she was always meant to have. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story teaches us that you should never judge a book by its cover. People may seem quiet or unassuming, but they can possess incredible strength and skills hidden just beneath the surface. It also shows that true character isn't about status or titles, like the arrogant doctor had, but about doing the right thing, even when it's hard and comes at a great personal cost. Ilara's story is a powerful reminder that integrity and courage will always be recognized in the end, and that standing up for what is right is the most heroic act of all. What would you have done if you were in Ilara's position? Would you have risked your career to save a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Have a nice rest of your day.